What teacher lost everyone's respect in one day? I was taking my Spanish state exam when my phone rang. It was my mom's hospice. Your mother is declining fast. She has maybe 30 minutes left if she's lucky. The hospice was 20 minutes away if I walked, 10 if I ran. Miss Vexler didn't even look up from her clipboard. Phones down during state exams or automatic fail. No, you don't understand. Your mom's been dying for months now, hasn't she? Convenient timing for test day. She snatched my phone and locked it in her desk drawer. 28 minutes left. My best friend Isabella shot up. Just let him go, please! Miss Vexler planted herself in front of the door like a human barricade. Anyone who helps him leave gets reported for academic dishonesty. Through the desk holes, I could see my phone lighting up with texts. Please hurry, not much time left. That's when the principal's voice crackled over the intercom. Please send Archie Smith to the office for emergency family pickup. My heart jumped, but Miss Vexler walked to the intercom and pressed the button. Hospice said they made a mistake. The student is now taking a state exam. She turned back to me, eyes cold. Don't worry, I'm sure she's used to you disappointing her by now. The words hit like a physical blow. Something snapped in my chest and I couldn't breathe properly. I knew I was having a panic attack. 18 minutes left. Suddenly, the foster kid who never speaks stood up. His mom's the only adult who remembered my birthday. Her cake was the first birthday cake I ever had. Please let him say goodbye. Sit down, Anthony. Anthony's face crumbled, but he sank back into his chair. Miss Vexler scanned the room with narrowed eyes, daring anyone else to speak. You know what I think? She turned back to me, a cruel smile playing at her lips. I bet she's not even sick. Her fingers flew across the thermostat keypad. Probably just wants attention like you always do. Beep. Emergency shelter mode activated. The door locks clicked. We were sealed in. 15 minutes left. I could still make it if I ran the whole way. My chest was tight now, like someone was sitting on it. My heart was breaking in two. He's having a panic attack! Someone yelled. Maya, the special needs student, was crying now. Everyone laughed at my stutter. His mom taught me breathing exercises every day for free EE. Well, Miss Vexler was standing now. Maybe if Archie spent less time visiting her and more time studying, he wouldn't need to fake emergencies. My Apple Watch buzzed. Mom's heart monitor alert. Her vitals were dropping. 12 minutes. Maybe if I sprinted to see her. I was on my knees now, gasping. Please, she's dying. The classroom phone started ringing. Hello? Is this Archie Smith's high school? His mom is beep. Miss Vexler plugged out the phone mid-sentence. Amazing how the hospice knows exactly when we're taking state exams. Ellie, the quiet girl who was always covered in bruises, stood up shaking. She listened to me when no one else did. She saved my life. She wouldn't fake it. Please. Miss Vexler turned on me with pure venom. Well, this is the same mother who got me written up last month. Consider it karma. You're welcome. 8 minutes left. My legs gave out. I was crawling toward the door. That's when Ashley, perfect straight A Ashley, who'd never gotten a detention in her life, climbed on her desk. I have something to confess! Miss Vexler whipped around. Ashley? What are you? I cheated on every test. I stole the answer keys. I hacked your computer. What? Check your computer. It's all there. Miss Vexler abandoned the door, fumbling with her computer password. Ashley turned to me and grabbed my arm. Window, now! The whole class erupted. Desks banging. Kids shouting fake confessions. I grabbed a chair with shaking hands. Smash! Glass everywhere. I was through the window, cutting my hands, hitting the ground, running. 6 minutes. I ran like I'd never run before. My chest on fire. Heart shattering with every step. I burst through the hospice doors. Room 119. My mom looked so small in that bed. Her skin was paper thin, almost translucent. When I crashed through the door, completely out of breath with blood dripping from my hands, her eyes fluttered open. Mom, I love you so much. I'm so sorry She squeezed my hand, gathering every bit of strength she had left. Her lips moved again. I leaned in close. Her mouth formed the shape of U, but no sound came. Her hand went slack in mine. The entire class burst through the door 5 minutes later. They'd all run after me. The foster kid fell to his knees. Isabella was shaking with rage. Even the class clown just stood there, tears streaming down his face. Miss Vexler had stolen my mother's last words. We all knew what had to happen next. Nobody moved for what felt like forever, just standing there in Mom's room while the machines kept beeping even though they weren't connected to her anymore. Isabella's hand found mine and squeezed so hard it hurt, but I didn't pull away because the pain felt better than the numbness spreading through my chest. Anthony dropped to his knees right next to Mom's bed and started sobbing these big, messy tears that made his whole body shake. The hospice nurse came in real quiet and checked Mom's pulse even though we all knew she was gone, then wrote something on her clipboard and said the official time was 3:47 p.m. She looked at me with these sad eyes and pulled out her tablet, scrolling through something before turning it toward me. The call log showed everything. Every single attempt they'd made to reach the school starting at 3:17 p.m., exactly 30 minutes before Mom died, just like they promised. The timestamp burned into my brain like someone branded it there because Miss Vexler had known exactly how much time I had left when she locked that door. My phone started buzzing like crazy in my pocket, and when I pulled it out, there were 12 messages from different people at the school, mostly about how the janitor found the broken window and already called Officer Webb, who was on his way to investigate. My chest got tight again, but this time it wasn't panic. It was something harder and colder that made my hands shake for a different reason. Isabella grabbed my phone and started taking screenshots of everything. The messages, the times, even the missed calls from the hospice that showed up after Miss Vexler took my phone. More kids from class started showing up at the hospice. First just a couple, then more and more until the hallway outside Mom's room was packed with people. Some were crying real quiet, others just stood there looking shocked, and I heard someone say Miss Vexler's name with so much anger it made me flinch. Anthony still hadn't moved from his spot by the bed and kept whispering thank you over and over to Mom like she could still hear him. My phone rang and Amy Gordon's name showed up on the screen, but I couldn't deal with talking to anyone official right now, so I let it go to voicemail. Her message was all careful and professional, saying she heard what happened and wanted to help, but I could hear something else in her voice, maybe guilt or worry about what this meant for the school. Everything felt like it was moving too fast and too slow at the same time, like I was underwater watching things happen above the surface. The principal called next, and his voice through the phone speaker was all measured and careful, asking me to come in tomorrow to give a statement about the incident. The way he said incident instead of what it really was made something hot and angry bubble up in my chest, and I wanted to throw my phone against the wall, but Isabella grabbed it before I could. She knew me too well, knew I'd regret breaking it later when I needed those messages as proof. We stayed at the hospice for another hour while people came and went, some leaving flowers they bought from the gift shop downstairs, others just standing there not knowing what to do. When we finally left and walked through the parking lot, Ashley pulled me aside near the back corner where no one could see us. Her face was all pale and scared when she told me her whole cheating confession was completely made up just to create a distraction so I could get out. She kept wringing her hands and asking if she was going going to get expelled, but also saying she'd do it again if she had to. I didn't know what to say because part of me wanted to thank her, and part of me wanted to tell her she shouldn't have risked her whole future for me. Isabella had already started a group chat while we were still in the parking lot and sent a message asking everyone to write down exactly what they remembered while it was still fresh in their minds. Within an hour, my phone had 17 different messages from classmates, all saying the same basic thing about how Miss Vexler locked us in and were ignored the hospice calls. Maya's message was the hardest to read because she typed out exactly how she talked, with all the stuttering, and wrote about how mom helped her every single day for free when no one else would. The foster home people came to pick up Anthony, but he didn't want to leave, and they had to practically drag him to their car while he kept looking back at the hospice building. That evening, I sat alone in mom's room at home with all her things the hospice had given me in a plastic bag. Her favorite sweater still smelled like her lavender perfume, and when I held it up to my face, I could almost pretend she was still there. The half-formed word she couldn't finish saying kept playing in my head over and over, that silent U her mouth made but couldn't voice. I folded the sweater real careful and put it back in the bag with her reading glasses and the book she'd been halfway through. Around 8 o'clock, the whole group from class showed up at my door without anyone planning it, and we walked through the neighborhood together, not really talking, but just being there. There's something really strange about Miss Vexler's reaction here. She seems way too prepared for this exact situation, like she knew the hospice would call during the exam. The way she immediately dismissed it as convenient timing, and then claimed the hospice made a mistake over the intercom, makes me wonder what's really driving her actions. Neighbors came out of their houses to watch us pass, and some of them knew Mom from all the kids she'd helped over the years. Mrs. Becker from down the street came out with a casserole dish covered in foil, and didn't say anything, just pulled me into this tight hug that made me start crying again, even though I thought I was all cried out. Back inside, my phone was going crazy with notifications, and when I finally looked at it, there were like 50 messages from kids at the school. Isabella had been texting me screenshots all afternoon of people posting about what happened on Instagram and TikTok, and the comments were already getting wild. Some people were calling Miss Vexler a monster and saying she should go to jail, while others were saying we were probably making it up for attention. Isabella was staying up trying to respond to everyone and keep the facts straight, because some kids who weren't even in our class were adding made-up details about things that never happened. My inbox had this email from someone named Yvette Mendoza, who said she was a district investigator and needed to schedule an interview with me for tomorrow afternoon about the incident. The way she wrote it all formal and official made everything feel way more serious, and I forwarded it to Isabella, who was basically handling everything for me at this point. Then another email came in from the exam board saying our Spanish state exam was flagged as compromised because of the classroom evacuation, and everyone who was in that room would have to deal with the investigation. My whole future felt like it was falling apart along with everything else, and I couldn't even think about college applications anymore. The phone rang, and it was Officer Webb from the police station saying I needed to come give a statement about the broken window and property damage. The way he talked made it sound like I was some criminal who vandalized school property instead of someone trying to see their dying mom, and my hands started shaking all over again. Isabella called me right after and said Amy Gordon had contacted her about Ellie's written statement, and that she was legally required to report suspected abuse to CPS. We all knew Ellie had problems at home with those bruises, but seeing it become this official thing made me feel guilty for not noticing sooner when Mom would have noticed right away. Later that night, I had to sit at the kitchen table with all the hospice paperwork and sign a bunch of forms with the official time of death printed in black ink staring back at me. The hospice counselor was really nice and confirmed they had records of both calls they made to the school, which proved we weren't lying, but it didn't make anything better. The next morning, I had to go back to the school, and Miss Vexler's classroom had a substitute teacher sitting at her desk looking super uncomfortable while everyone whispered about what happened. Walking down the halls was awful because I couldn't tell if people were staring at me because they felt bad or because they just wanted to see the kid from the viral story. I kept my head down and tried to just get through each class without breaking down again. Amy Gordon pulled our whole group into her office during third period for what she called a grief check-in, and Anthony actually talked in full sentences for the first time I could remember. He told us how Mom was the only adult who ever made him feel like he mattered, and how she remembered things about him that even his foster parents forgot. We were all crying by the end, especially when Maya talked about how Mom helped her with her stutter every day after school for free. During fourth period, the principal held this big assembly where he talked about yesterday's incident and proper emergency procedures, but he never mentioned Mom dying or Miss Vexler locking us in. The way he made it sound all clean and official like it was just some drill that went wrong made me so mad I had to leave the auditorium before I did something stupid. At lunch, I went to the library and used their computer to file a formal complaint through the district's online portal with Isabella, helping me write everything down with all the exact times and details. Ashley came over and added her part about the fake confession she made to distract Miss Vexler and took full responsibility for lying about cheating, even though she was just trying to help me. The librarian kept looking over at us because we were all crowded around one computer, but she didn't say anything when she saw we were crying. That afternoon, more kids started coming forward with their own stories about Miss Vexler and how she'd done cruel things to them over the years, but nobody had ever reported it before. One girl said Miss Vexler made her take a test the day after her dog died and told her animals don't have souls, so she shouldn't be upset. Another kid said she wouldn't let him call his dad when he was having an asthma attack because she thought he was faking. The stories kept coming, and Isabella was documenting everything in this big Google Doc she shared with Amy Gordon and the district investigator. My dad finally got home from his business trip that night, and when he saw all the missed calls and messages, he just broke down completely. He kept saying he should have been there, and how Mom would never forgive him for missing her last moments, but I told him it wasn't his fault because nobody expected it to happen so fast. We sat at the kitchen table going through all the emails and documents, and he got really quiet when he read the part about Miss Vexler saying Mom got her written up last month. He told me that Mom had reported Miss Vexler for making a special needs kid stand in the corner for an hour as punishment, and the principal had dismissed it as a misunderstanding. Now that made sense why Miss Vexler had been so cruel about everything, because she wanted revenge on our family. After school the next day, I was walking to my car when this woman with a press badge came up to me in the parking lot. She said her name was Zelda Vasquez, and she'd been looking into teachers who abuse their power for months now. She showed me a folder full of articles she'd written about other cases and asked if I'd be willing to share my story. I told her I needed to think about it because everything was still too raw, and I didn't know if I was ready to go public yet. She gave me her card and said she'd wait for my call whenever I was ready. Walking back into school, I saw Ashley coming out of the principal's office, and she looked like she'd been crying. She told me they were threatening to put academic dishonesty on her permanent record, even even though she admitted right away that her confession was fake. The principal said it didn't matter that she was trying to help me because she still disrupted a state exam and made false claims about hacking school computers. My stomach twisted knowing she was getting punished for trying to save me from missing my mom's last moments. That evening, I was sitting at home when my phone rang, and it was Leander Washington calling about Anthony. He said the school had contacted him about Anthony leaving during the exam, and now they were marking it as truancy on his record. He was trying to be supportive, but I could hear the worry in his voice about how this might affect Anthony's foster placement. Mom had worked so hard to keep Anthony in a stable home, and now that was at risk because he stood up for me. The next morning, a package arrived from the hospice with all their call logs and the nurses' notes from that day. Every single call they made to the school was documented with exact times and what they said each time. The notes showed how many times they tried to reach me and how urgent they said it was. I spent an hour making copies of everything while Isabella scanned it all to create digital backups on 3 different drives. Later that day, Officer Webb came to review the school security footage with me in the main office. We watched the footage from that morning, and you could see Miss Vexler typing on the shelter mode keypad right after the principal's announcement played over the intercom. The timestamp showed she activated it exactly 17 seconds after being told to send me to the office for emergency pickup. Even Webb looked uncomfortable watching it, and he kept shaking his head while taking notes. The next day at the school, I saw a woman in a suit walking Ellie to the counselor's office and found out later she was from CPS. Amy told me after lunch that they'd found evidence of serious problems at Ellie's home and were opening a full investigation. Mom had been right to worry about her all those times she noticed the bruises, and now I wished she was here to help Ellie through this. 2 days later, I got called to the district office for an interview with Yvette Mendoza from the school board. The interview felt more like being interrogated about the exam than about what Miss Vexler did to me. She kept asking if anyone had their phones out during the test and whether the exam papers were secure the whole time. She wanted to know if anyone could have taken pictures of the questions or shared answers while everything was happening. I realized sitting there that the district cared more about their test scores and exam security than they did about a kid missing his dying mother. When I pulled up my Apple Watch to show Mendoza the data from that morning, she finally paid attention. The watch had recorded every heart monitor alert from Mom's medical devices during those 30 minutes. You could see her heart rate dropping minute by minute while I was trapped in that classroom. Having to use my mom's dying heartbeat as evidence made me feel sick, but I showed her anyway. Mendoza took photos of the watch screen, but her face stayed blank like she was looking at a spreadsheet instead of proof of my mom's final moments. The next morning, Isabella had organized a sit-in outside Miss Vexler's empty classroom before first period. How did Isabella manage to organize all those students for a sit-in when everyone was already dealing with so much? The way she kept track of everything in Google Docs and helped file complaints while still planning protests shows such amazing organizational skills for a teenager. About 40 kids showed up and sat silently in the hallway with signs that said things like, "Let us say goodbye," and "Humanity over test scores." The vice principal came out and threatened everyone with suspension if they didn't move, but nobody got up. We all sat there until the first bell rang and then quietly went to our classes without saying a word. That afternoon, Bennett Mason from the Teachers Union released a statement to the local news defending Miss Vexler's right to due process. The statement warned against rushing to judgment and said teachers need to maintain exam security without being blamed for following protocol. Reading it made me understand that no matter what she did to me, she was going to have professional defenders protecting her. The system was designed to protect teachers like her, not students like me, and that made everything feel even more hopeless. That evening, I dragged myself to the school board meeting even though every part of me wanted to stay in bed. The meeting room was packed with parents and teachers, and I signed up for public comment with shaking hands. When they called my name, I walked to the podium and looked at 5 board members shuffling papers and checking their phones like they had better places to be. I started telling them what happened, and my voice cracked on every other word, but I kept going. I told them about the hospice call and the locked door, and Mom dying while I was trapped in that classroom. One board member was doodling on his notepad, and another kept looking at the clock on the wall. Halfway through my statement, the room started spinning, and my chest got so tight I couldn't breathe right. The panic attack hit me hard, and I gripped the podium to stay standing. That's when Amy Gordon stood up from the audience and walked right up to me. She started doing the breathing exercises Mom had taught Maya, and coached me through them while everyone watched. 4 counts in and 4 counts out, and slowly the room stopped spinning. I finished my statement with tears running down my face and my voice barely above a whisper. The board members thanked me for my time and moved to the next speaker like nothing had happened. The next morning, I woke up to my phone going crazy with notifications. Zelda Vasquez had published her article about what happened, and it was everywhere online and in the local paper. The comment section was a war zone with people calling us spoiled kids who didn't respect teachers, and others sharing their own bad experiences with Miss Vexler. Isabella was screenshotting the worst comments and saving them in a folder she labeled evidence. Some parents were saying we should have followed the rules, and others were saying no rule was worth what happened to me. The arguing got so bad the paper had to turn off comments. My email dinged with a message from the exam board about scheduling my makeup test. The only slot they had was the same day as Mom's funeral, which was in 3 days. I emailed back explaining the conflict, and they said I could take it next month, but it might affect my college application since scores would be late. Every single option felt like another punishment for trying to see my dying mom. Isabella's mom found out I was trying to handle all the funeral stuff alone and started a GoFundMe without asking me. She wrote about how Mom had helped so many families over the years, and now it was time to help her son. Within 6 hours, it raised $8,000 with donations from families Mom had tutored for free and kids she'd fed when their parents couldn't afford lunch. I was grateful, but also felt like a charity case and hated that everyone knew I couldn't even afford to bury my own mother. Ashley submitted a formal written statement to the school district explaining she'd lied about hacking Miss Vexler's computer. She included screenshots of her real grades showing she'd never needed to cheat and explained she only said it to create a distraction so I could escape. Her parents were so mad at her for getting involved that they grounded her for a month and took away her car. A letter came from Officer Webb saying I needed to pay $200 for the broken window or do 20 hours of community service. The fact that I was getting punished for breaking a window to see my dying mother made me so angry, I threw the letter across the room. Isabella's mom said she'd help me fight it, but I was too tired to care anymore. That night I was going through Mom's stuff and found an old voicemail on my phone from 2 weeks ago that I'd never deleted. She was reminding me about a dentist appointment, and at the end she said love you in that casual way moms do when they don't know it might be the last time. I played it over and over until I had it memorized, and then saved it in 3 different places on my phone and backed it up to the cloud twice. The principal sent an email to all parents that night trying to cover everything up. He blamed what he called called the incident on a technical error with the intercom system and claimed Miss Vexler couldn't hear the announcement properly because of static. The lie was so obvious that even parents who weren't there started asking questions on the school Facebook page. Parents were demanding to know why the door was locked and why multiple phone calls were ignored if it was just an intercom problem. 6 days after Mom died, the district finally announced that Miss Vexler had been placed on paid administrative leave while they investigated. She was still getting her full salary while I was picking out the cheapest casket I could find and trying to figure out how to write a eulogy. When I read the announcement in the hallway, Isabella had to physically grab my arms to stop me from punching the wall. The other kids from class were just as mad, and we all stood there in the hallway not saying anything because there wasn't anything to say that would make it better. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with an email from an address I didn't recognize. The attachment was a PDF file with 3 separate complaints against Miss Vexler from the past 5 years. Each one described stuff that made my stomach turn, like when she locked a kid with diabetes in the classroom during a medical emergency, or when she refused to let a girl call her mom who was having surgery. Every single complaint got the same result, which was either dismissed for insufficient evidence or Miss Vexler getting sent to some training workshop that obviously didn't change anything. I sat there staring at my phone screen feeling sick because Mom had died for nothing and this woman had been doing this for years. The next morning, Amy Gordon knocked on my door holding a folder and looking nervous. She worked for Child Protective Services and said she needed my help with Ellie's case because Mom had told her about concerns she had. Ellie was staying with an emergency foster family now after everything came out about her home situation. Amy wanted me to write down everything Mom had said about Ellie and any times Mom had helped her or noticed the bruises. I spent 3 hours writing down every detail I could remember, like how Mom would pack extra lunches knowing Ellie wasn't eating at home, or how she taught Ellie breathing exercises when she had panic attacks. Writing it all down made me realize how much Mom had been doing behind the scenes for kids who needed help. That afternoon, our whole class met at the community center where this older lady who was a notary was waiting with a stack of legal forms. Everyone had to write their own affidavit about what happened that day in the classroom. Anthony sat in the corner writing page after page about Mom and how she was the only adult who ever remembered his birthday and made him feel like he mattered. His handwriting was all shaky because he kept crying and having to stop. Maya wrote about the speech therapy Mom did with her for free every day after school. Even kids I didn't know that well had stories about Mom helping them with homework or giving them rides home when their parents forgot to pick them up. The notary kept having to take breaks because she was getting emotional reading all these statements from teenagers about this one woman who had changed their lives. By the time we finished, there were 43 sworn statements about what Miss Vexler did and about who Mom really was. Meanwhile, Zelda Vasquez, who was this reporter that had been following the story, filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all the records from that day. She wanted the intercom logs to prove the principal really did call for me and the thermostat control records to show when shelter mode was activated. She explained that these requests usually took weeks or sometimes months, but sometimes they produced smoking guns that changed everything. I was learning real fast that justice moved way slower than grief. The billing department at the hospice called me in for a meeting about Mom's final expenses, and I walked into this tiny office filled with papers and numbers that made my head spin. The total was more than I'd ever seen in my life, and I just sat there realizing I was 18 years old and had no idea how to handle any of this. The counselor saw me starting to panic and helped me fill out applications for hardship programs and payment plans. She showed me how to submit claims to Mom's insurance, which barely covered anything, and walked me through setting up a payment plan for the rest. I left that office feeling like I was drowning in adult stuff I wasn't ready for, while Miss Vexler was probably at home watching TV. The next day, Leander Washington, who was one of the foster parents Mom worked with, brought Anthony over to my place. We spent the whole afternoon going through this box of photos Mom had kept of all the birthday cakes she made for foster kids over the years. Anthony found the picture of his cake from last year, which was this elaborate superhero theme with his name spelled out in frosting. Miss Vexler getting paid leave while this kid picks out cheap caskets? Something tells me the district knew about those past complaints all along, but kept them buried until this became too public to ignore. He held that photo like it was made of gold, and kept saying it was the first birthday cake anyone ever made just for him. Leander told us Mom had made cakes for 37 different foster kids over the past 10 years, and never charged a single family. We all sat there crying, and it felt okay to cry together about someone who had loved us that much. Then Ashley's parents showed up at the school with some expensive lawyer demanding to meet with the administration. They were threatening to sue the school district for putting their daughter in a position where she felt she had to lie and create a distraction just so I could see my dying mom. The principal actually called me that afternoon asking if I could talk to Ashley's parents and convince them not to sue like I had any control over what they did. I hung up on him without saying anything, because what was there to say to someone who thought I could fix his mess? A week into the investigation, the district suddenly expanded it to include the principal's response to the hospice call. Yvette Mendoza seemed frustrated when she told me the case kept growing and getting more complicated. She kept talking about protocols and procedures while I just wanted to scream that my mom was dead and nothing they did would bring her back. These small victories everyone kept mentioning didn't feel like victories when I went home to an empty house every night. Isabella got fed up with Mendoza's attitude and confronted her right outside the district office with her phone recording. She asked point blank why they cared more about test protocol violations than the actual harm that was caused. Mendoza tried to dodge the question at first, but Isabella kept pushing until Mendoza admitted they were mainly concerned about the state exam irregularities and whether proper procedures were followed. That night we posted the recording online, and within hours it had thousands of views and comments from people calling out the district for missing the point entirely. The next morning someone slipped an envelope under my door with no return address. Inside was a copy of the technical manual for the exact model of thermostat in our classroom. The pages about emergency shelter mode were highlighted, showing it required a specific 5-digit override code to activate, which proved Miss Vexler had deliberately locked us in instead of it being some accident like she was claiming. The evidence kept piling up, but nothing seemed to change, and Miss Vexler was still getting paid while I was trying to figure out how to pay for a funeral. 2 days later, a thick envelope from the school district showed up, and inside were the FOIA documents Zelda had requested weeks ago. But something was wrong, because right where the principal's announcement should have been, there were just blank pages with timestamps missing from exactly 10:47 to 10:52 a.m. Zelda came over that night and spread all the papers across my kitchen table, pointing at the gaps with her pen, and explaining how this kind of selective deletion never happens by accident, and someone had to deliberately remove those specific minutes from the official record. She photocopied everything and added it to the growing folder of evidence we were building, even though it felt like collecting proof of a crime nobody wanted to prosecute. The pre-hearing conference happened 2 weeks after Mom died, and they packed us into this small conference room at the district office, where some lawyer in a gray suit announced that student testimony would be limited to direct observations, only with no emotional impact statements allowed. Isabella's mom started arguing immediately, saying they were trying to erase the human cost of what happened, but the lawyer just kept repeating the same phrase about maintaining professional standards and avoiding prejudicial testimony. Anthony sat there with his fists clenched while Maya's parents took notes, and Ashley's lawyer whispered something to her dad, who looked ready to explode. They handed out these forms we had to sign agreeing to the testimony restrictions, and I watched everyone reluctantly put pen to paper, knowing we had no choice if we wanted to be heard at all. 3 days after that meeting, Amy called to tell me Ellie had been moved to a temporary shelter facility after her foster placement fell through, and she said it was actually safer than where she'd been before, but the way her voice caught on the word safer told me everything. I went to visit Ellie at the shelter and found her in this sterile common room with plastic furniture and cameras in every corner, and she looked smaller somehow, like the system was slowly erasing her. She told me Mom would have been devastated to see another kid falling through the cracks, and I couldn't argue because Mom spent years trying to help kids like Ellie find stability. The community service paperwork arrived the next morning requiring my signature to confirm 20 hours of unpaid work at the school for the window I broke saving my mother's life. Officer Webb showed up at my door to witness the signing, and at least he had the decency to look ashamed when I wrote my name on the line agreeing to give free labor to the place that killed my mom. He mumbled something about just following protocol, but we both knew this was the system protecting itself by making me the criminal instead of them. Mom's funeral was 4 days later in the small chapel she'd always liked, and even though we couldn't afford much, the entire class showed up, filling every pew and standing along the walls. Anthony had written this poem about birthday cakes and second chances that he read in a shaking voice, while Maya managed to sing Mom's favorite hymn, despite her stutter getting worse with every verse. Even kids who barely knew her came to pay respects, and I recognized faces from the hallway who'd never spoken to me, but somehow knew what Mom meant to our school. Miss Vexler didn't show her face, which was good, because Isabella looked ready to fight anyone who dared defend what happened that day. The exam board letter came a week after the funeral, granting me a partial waiver that let me graduate without the Spanish exam, but marking it as incomplete on my permanent transcript. They made it sound like mercy, but really it meant some colleges would automatically reject my application because of that incomplete mark following me forever. Another dream Mom wouldn't see come true because one teacher decided her power trip mattered more than a dying woman's last moments with her son. The district hearing finally happened 3 weeks after Mom died in this big conference room with wood paneling and a long table where 5 board members sat like judges. They presented their evidence first with printed logs and policy manuals and PowerPoint slides about proper emergency procedures, while we sat there with our stories of what actually happened in that room. Mendoza kept talking about precedent and liability concerns while we tried to explain about humanity and basic decency, but you could see the divide in the room between people who saw policies and people who saw pain. The principal testified that he'd followed standard protocol, and the board members nodded, like that mattered more than the fact that he'd lied about my mom's condition to keep me trapped. When they announced their decision a week later, the principal received an official reprimand and 40 hours of crisis management training, but kept his job and his full salary and his pension. The district newsletter called it a resolution and talked about learning opportunities and improved procedures, but everyone knew it was just the system protecting one of their own. Miss Vexler got reassigned to some administrative role at the district office, pending remediation training, which meant she was still getting paid to push papers instead of facing any real consequences. The other students looked at me expecting anger or rage, but I just felt empty because we all knew she'd be back in a classroom within a year, maybe 2. Ashley's parents hired this expensive lawyer who negotiated her down from expulsion to academic probation, even though all she did was try to save my life by creating a distraction. She had to write a 10-page essay about academic integrity, which she showed me later, and the last line said she'd do it all again in a heartbeat, no matter what they threatened her with. 3 weeks later, the school board met in the gym, and I sat in the back row watching them vote on new safety rules. They called it the Henderson Protocol, after some dead superintendent from the 80s, even though Mom was the reason kids would get out alive next time. The board members kept checking their phones and shuffling papers while they talked about override buttons and emergency keys like they invented the idea. My hands were shaking, but I kept them pressed against my legs. 2 days after that, Amy showed up at my house and said we needed to visit Ellie at the group home across town. The place smelled like cleaning stuff and old food when we walked through the metal detector at the front door. Ellie was sitting in this common room with plastic chairs and a TV playing cartoons nobody was watching. She looked smaller somehow, but her bruises were gone, and she actually smiled when she saw us. She told me Mom used to bring her sandwiches after school when her dad forgot to buy food again. She said the group home was actually better because nobody hit her here, and she got 3 meals every day. We both knew we'd promised to stay in touch, but wouldn't really do it because that's just how these things work. The next morning, Zelda's article went live on 3 different news sites, and my phone started going crazy with notifications. People I'd never met were calling me a spoiled brat who traumatized a good teacher just trying to do her job. Someone found my Instagram and posted screenshots of me smiling at a party 2 weeks after Mom died, like grief means you can never smile again. Isabella came over and we spent 4 hours blocking accounts and reporting death threats, while more kept coming in faster than we could delete them. Wow, the Henderson Protocol name choice is really interesting. Why would they name safety rules after someone from the 80s instead of the person whose death actually sparked these changes? She made me turn off my phone and we watched stupid movies until I could breathe normal again. That weekend our whole class met in the parking lot with cash they'd collected in a shoebox. Anthony had done car washes, and Maya sold her Pokemon cards, and even the kids who usually didn't care threw in 20s from their parents. We counted $800, which was enough to pay for the window I broke, plus paint and supplies for Miss Vexler's old classroom. Nobody talked much while we worked, but everyone showed up with brushes and rollers and drop cloths. We painted the walls this soft blue color and fixed the broken desks and cleaned years of dust off the windows. Someone's mom brought sandwiches, but most of us were too tired to eat. 5 weeks after Mom died, I finally walked into the therapy office Amy had been pushing me toward for weeks. The waiting room had these fake plants and magazines from 3 years ago, and forms asking me to rate my sadness on a scale of 1 to 10. How do you put a number on watching your mom die while some teacher kept you locked in a room? The therapist was this quiet guy who didn't try to fix everything in the first session, which was good, because I mostly just sat there staring at his certificates on the wall. The next week, my my guidance counselor called me in and spread out all these college papers on her desk. She said the incomplete Spanish exam was gonna hurt my GPA and maybe cost me the state scholarship I'd been counting on. We spent an hour looking up grants for kids who lost parents and filling out forms that wanted to know exactly how much money mom left me, which was basically nothing. She kept saying education was the way forward, just like mom used to say, and I wanted to tell her to stop, but didn't. 6 weeks later, I was lying in bed at 2 in the morning playing that last moment over and over in my head. Mom's mouth making the shape of U, with no sound coming out but her eyes saying everything she couldn't. I finally understood that the words didn't need sound to be real, because love doesn't need perfect pronunciation to count. I could feel what she meant in the way she squeezed my hand, and the way she looked at me like I was the most important thing in her whole world. The next morning, our class went back to the school early to install this small metal plaque by the classroom window I'd broken. It just said, "Every minute matters," because the school wouldn't let us put mom's name on it, even though everyone knew what it meant. Anthony screwed it into the brick while Maya held it straight, and Isabella took pictures for kids who couldn't make it. The principal walked by and frowned, but didn't say anything because what could he really do now? I heard later that Miss Vexler had to walk past it every morning at her new job at Jefferson Middle School across the district, and I hoped she thought about mom every single time. Thanks for letting me question things right alongside you. Hopefully my wondering was